Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to our Wednesday night webinar brought to you by NoCD. NoCD, a downloadable app that you can get on the Google Play or iOS store. OCD hosts teletherapy across the country. We are currently in all 50 states and consistently work on getting more and more insurance companies to help us pay for you to get evidence-based treatment through exposure and response prevention therapy as well. As we do every third Wednesday of the month, we change it over to our diversity series, and it's our Diversity Matters Club. And tonight we are going to talk about a topic with OCD and substance use. And it's a very important topic, and I have some very, very dear people with me here tonight on. So I'm going to turn it over first to Lauren to introduce herself, and then I'm going to let Margaret tell a little bit about herself as well too. So Lauren, say hi to the crowd for us.
Hi, crowd. Thanks so much for having me, and I'm thrilled to be here to talk about OCD and substance use disorder. As for me, I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California, and I also do some work in Florida. And I also have both OCD and I'm in recovery from drinking excessively from a substance use disorder. I'm a recovering alcoholic. And that's kind of me in a nutshell. And I work primarily with people with OCD, and just glad to have the opportunity to talk about the sort of overlap between the two disorders.
Great. And Margaret?
Hi, I'm Margaret Sisson, and I am Executive Director of Riley's Wish, a foundation I started after I lost my son in 2014 to an accidental overdose. He also struggled with OCD. And I'm always grateful to be on with Patrick, a dear friend who has been such a support. Sometimes he's a friend, but
sometimes he's a pain in the butt too. But yeah, whatever.
That too. But that's why I like you. But Patrick has been supportive and keeps this important issue in the forefront, because it is. And as Lauren and I have just met, and I'm grateful to, it is out there more than we know. And statistics are showing that OCD and SUDS is really a factor in our society that I'm not sure that people actually recognize. So the more we talk about it, and the more we raise awareness, and the more we educate, I think we're going to help lots of people.
So let's talk a little bit about those statistics and things. And it's kind of the unspoken piece of OCD. There's unfortunately almost a quarter or more of people with OCD have a substance use problem, or have had one, or have turned to substances at some point in time while their OCD was raging, going on, starting, depending on where it was for anybody. Margaret, I know that we've talked about how, you said Riley struggled for a long time and then discovered alcohol shut his brain off for a little while. Mm-hmm. And what a beautiful thing he felt that was, and how that turned into a substance abuse issue for him. And it led Margaret and I to talking a lot about some of the struggles that Riley went through, and how difficult it was, because almost every treatment center in the country will not take you if you have both an OCD and a substance use disorder going on at the same time. Which led me to really work with where I was at Amita Health, Alexian Brothers, to open the first residential treatment center in the world that would take people who had both OCD and a co-occurring substance use at the same time and treat them for both. Because frankly, just to be brutally honest, when you don't do that, people die.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to see that happen anymore. I didn't want Margaret to go through anything like that before. I'm reading the chat a little bit on the side. Carl, who's one of our advocates, talks about he relied a great deal on alcohol in his late teens and 20s to alleviate his symptoms. Mm-hmm. So I think that it will be interesting tonight to kind of watch. I'll keep an eye on the chat as well too, but to have this discussion and to kind of bring this out in the open so that people really do realize that this is far more of an issue than we've talked about, than we've given credit to as well. So, and both of you have been touched personally by the effects of substance abuse and OCD. So I think that and again, whatever comfort level the two of you have of talking about that, but what have you learned from your own journeys in treatment or in family relationships, and seeing what alcohol does to a person's life, what OCD does to a person's life, and then what the combination of those two things do to someone's life as well too?
Yeah. Margaret, you want to start, or?
It's, I lost Riley, it was 6 years ago, and I look back, I often, probably every day, look back at things. I do say to moms or parents that I talk to, you can't go back, you go forward, and you can't go back and say, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that. Because I 100% believe in the moment you do the best you can. And it's, as a parent, it's incredibly difficult. As you know, just the OCD, as a parent dealing with OCD and not reassuring, because that's you're as a parent, that's exactly what you want to do, and that's exactly what you can't do. So you have that piece, and then you have the substance. And Lauren, is, with substance use, I always said to Riley, I can't stand the addiction. I'll always love you, because there were things that happened that, were hard. And it wasn't Riley. It was the addiction happening. So it affected, and I look back my whole life, how from the time, he was diagnosed, that's, as a parent, you're trying to get the best help, trying to find the best doctors. And we went through that vicious cycle. And Riley said, when I found alcohol, those thoughts stopped. And who wouldn't want that to happen? So I know there's a lot of, as we know that happens. And there's no shame in that. There is no shame in that, because OCD is a difficult disease. And on top of that, and that was what happened when Patrick and I talked a lot about, you take that one thing that someone helps them, and then you go into a residential and they take that away. Nope, can't have that. We're not even going to deal. Well, that's not even possible. And I know enough people that have been at Fogley that it's changed their life, and they are in a great place. And so I know it can be done. I know it. There's not even a question. It's just how we do it.
Yeah.
And I know Kaylee's in the background. Kaylee, if you could put up the link for Riley's Wish Foundation and also for the Foglia Family Foundation Residential Treatment Center, just so that people have that in the chat too, I'd appreciate it. So, thank you. Laura.
Just to echo some of what you said, Margaret, I think it's so understandable that people with OCD turn to substances. And I certainly know that was the case for me, that when I discovered alcohol, I was about 13 years old, and it was magic. I wasn't diagnosed with OCD until I was in my 20s, but I was suffering with it for since I was probably about 7. And so I thought, oh, this is it. Like, I'm going to be okay. And I can sort of deal with having a very, very overactive mind with this. And it was interesting. I was watching the thread, and somebody said it only works for so long with regard to alcohol and drug abuse. And I would say that that's absolutely true. It works until it doesn't work anymore. But for a long time, that was the answer. And I think to recognize that as we treat individuals who have both OCD and substance use disorder, that this is medication for a time. It's unfortunately, just like with compulsions in the realm of OCD, the solution becomes the problem after a time. Sometimes it happens quickly, sometimes slowly. But yeah, I certainly, in my own experience, it was great until it wasn't anymore. And I think what's also interesting from my vantage point, and I also saw something come up about this, is the fear of substances. That really is where my OCD, because I got into recovery from my alcoholism prior to getting diagnosed with OCD, my anxiety, my OCD really latched on to treatment and to recovery. And yeah, somebody said the fear of weed. I was terrified that I was going to relapse on some sort of substance. And so just hearing too how the two can play off of one another and interact in ways that are very challenging.
I've seen people then even say, I don't want to go to a sushi restaurant because soy sauce is fermented and therefore it might have alcohol in it. And does that mean that I violated my pledge to be abstinent, or could I get a DUI from soy sauce and something like that? And I've had those conversations with people who become so concerned about even those types of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was a point in time where I didn't want to go to parties with alcohol around, not because I was afraid that I was going to drink, but because I would be so vigilant about like where the alcohol was being passed and whether or not I would eat a chip from a chip bowl when a drink had been passed over it, because well, what if it got contaminated?
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I think and all sorts of stuff, like vanilla extract, right? And something that I love is like baking cookies. And for a while, that was exposure work for me, was, making chocolate chip cookie dough and eating the raw dough, which was.
I'll send an address you can send cookies to after the show.
It wasn't the worst exposure. I'm not going to lie. So I'll definitely make good use of that. So.
And Lauren, that's it, because Riley would say, he'd say, you know what? Unfortunately, I didn't get that fear that if I drank something, it would, he said, because that was my problem, that he thought that alcohol and eventually other substances, and Patrick, we've talked like Klonopin.
I was going to bring up benzos. Yeah.
Benzos were what, and he would convince himself that because it did make him feel better. I mean, and he'd say, well, if one made me feel better, I bet you 5 would make me really feel better. And then that would click his brain into the addiction and cravings. And I mean, that's what happened at the end is doctors had put him back on Klonopin, and he was going to try to control it and couldn't.
Yeah, the dangers are not just illegal drugs. There can be some prescription drugs too that can definitely, especially the anti-anxiety drugs, that can be a problem. And unfortunately, there's a lot of prescriptions of those because someone will go into maybe a GP office or something who isn't as educated on anxiety and say, well, there's this class of drugs that helps your anxiety decrease. And
they call it the Band-Aid.
And that's what it is. And then you need more and more of that because your threshold for why you need a benzo gets lower and lower over time. And then even lower and lower stressors could lead you to want to use one. And then from a therapist point of view, and Lauren, I think you'd agree with me, if somebody's taking let's say they pop a benzo right before a session and they say, okay, I took my benzodiazepine, I'm ready to do exposure and response prevention therapy. I say, you just go home, right? It's really not worth doing the session right now if you can't even get your anxiety level up because you took something to make it stay down because you didn't want to feel uncomfortable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of the issue is this larger dialogue in our culture that says anxiety is bad, right? And certainly there's an evolutionary basis to that we're all like, oh, unpleasant emotion, get it away. But we're desperate to get rid of it. And I think in terms of whether it's benzodiazepines or alcohol and other drugs, that it really becomes more about being willing to feel your feelings and open up to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've even had some conversations in the last few weeks with people who, and this is typically people around age, anywhere from 15 up to 20, who thought, well, I would just use some marijuana and that would help me calm down. But it had the opposite effect and it made them amazingly paranoid. Mm-hmm. And now they feel depersonalization or derealization, and they can't tell if they're still high or they're not high and what's real or not real. And it can bring about almost an existential OCD type of crisis for people to not feel like they're in their body or attached to themselves or the environment that they're in or something like that too.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, in addition to the existential fears, just the concern of having some sort of a mental break comes up a lot in that with the sort of mental health OCD that we see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for people who do use substances as a way to control their OCD or try to diminish it as much as possible, what kind of things have the two of you found could be helpful or motivating to get a person to take the step to start working on? I mean, it's because obviously it's probably hard enough to just work on one of them. I mean, to motivate someone to go into ERP for OCD is not the easiest. To get somebody in an intervention to stop drinking or using drugs is not the easiest. How about when someone has both those things? I mean, what are the things to motivate someone to change and hopefully stick with that change as well too? What have you found?
Well, and I think that's with OCD and when you add the substance use, it becomes life or death. With just OCD, and now obviously I'm not gonna, someone with suicide, etc. But when someone is dealing with OCD and then substance use, and like you said, Patrick, that doesn't work enough and that doesn't work enough. And if you, and I'm not the scientist that says, but I know in the addiction in the brain, there is a difference in your brain when you are an addict or you struggle with substance use, and difference. And Riley would say that. He said, oh, and when he was in recovery, he'd say, yeah, I remember I could say, yeah, well, I'm just going to have one beer and I'll just have 2 beers and I can do that. Next day, well, I'll just have 3 beers. Well, then instead he has 50 because he can't stop. And once that, especially with the Klonopin, once they put him on that, it just changed his brain into those cravings that he couldn't stop. And so I think that's and ERP was so, it's so difficult, but I know those many people who have gone to Fogley and have said, I was either going to die and I need help. And that's dealing and then going in and really hard stuff, but tackling what it takes to get better from OCD through the therapy and to understand what their substance use, how they deal with that in life. And I think that's the key is in educating people and helping parents understand that, because that's really hard as a parent when you're, and I remember way back when Riley was, maybe 17, reading something that somebody that struggled with a co-occurring with OCD and substance use and their addiction, that it was almost impossible to get them well. And I remember reading that and going, oh my God. And I said, no, that's not going to happen now. And I think if we'd had folk, and I can't go there, you know what?
Yeah.
I lost Riley. But I know there's hope, and I personally know that people can get better. I know that now. So.
Yeah, because the flip side might be, had we not met and had those discussions, I don't know if Foglia would be what it is.
Yeah, exactly. And,
and
many of people.
I don't know.
And many of people have been saved because of that. So, boy, at the end of the day, that's what will make a difference.
Yeah.
Sure. That's the trouble, isn't it? Like I in terms of motivation, so much of it is motivated through pain and through suffering and loss and challenge. I know for me, were great motivators in terms of getting sober. And I think the same is true of OCD. It's when the things stop working that you want to turn and make a change. But I will say on the other side of things, in terms of motivating factors, that values can be an incredible driving force behind either decision. And taking pause and taking stock in your life and saying, you know what, like, what do I want this to look like? And I know that was certainly, it's sort of both, it's maybe the same coin in different sides. It's like one is the carrot and one is the whip, right? The carrot is the values and what kind of a life do I want? And the sort of other side of that is that when you get into enough pain because your life is looking less and less like you want it to, that will often drive. So not that it doesn't make it easy. It doesn't make any of it easy. And I think that whether it's OCD, SUD, or both, that it takes a tremendous commitment and a willingness to feel pretty awful. And that's why I think it's so important to not only recognize the pain that's driving you away from those things, but also to have these things that you're moving toward and the recognition of what you can make of this life that will keep you going on the path.
Yeah. And I think the earlier we recognize with OCD, and you're foolish if you think that young people at 12, 13, and 14, like you, are not going to try substances, whether it be alcohol or marijuana or something to change their brain. So I think we have to have that conversation and that awareness way before they hit 18 and 20, because then it's even harder.
Well, and that's the thing is the DARE model doesn't seem to be working. The just say no is it's, and maybe with the best of intentions, but I think part of this is a larger education about mental health at younger and younger ages, because if you are introduced to alcohol and you understand that you're trying to silence, some anxiety and that you have other coping skills to turn to, you may make a different choice.
Right. It's that conversation that you have to have.
Yeah.
Because so many people don't have that conversation, and a young person thinks, well, you look at suicide of a young person, they think that failed relationship that their life should end. I mean, that's so they think at a young age, if they are introduced to something, because their brain, whether it be with their OCD, then gosh, then you're in a hard place. And like I say, we have Fogel, we have these incredible programs, but gosh, if we could go back and catch it before it even starts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Lots of things coming through on the on the chat here. So, and it's been interesting seeing various things. Someone talked about they thought their OCD didn't start until they got sober, and it was interesting. I've had people who I remember being at Foglia, and some people had come in and had said we were the first people that had ever asked them about anxiety. They'd been one person who'd been through over 20 detoxes in their life. And it was the first time anyone asked them about their anxiety. And there were people who were afraid to get sober because they knew they were going to have feelings again. And I think that when you start to have feelings, that's when you realize maybe you have depression, maybe you have an anxiety disorder, maybe you have OCD, maybe you have PTSD, whatever it might be, because the self-medication that you've been doing is now gone, and whatever's been repressed or underlying because of that is now coming back up again, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely. That's again where it's the solution until it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have either of you found then that it can be harder to get through to somebody who has both? Because obviously this won't be any shocker to anyone listening. People with alcohol, if you try to intervene, or other drugs, will probably tell you, go fly a kite. And people with OCD at times may also say a similar type of thing, or I'll figure this out on my own. I got it. Don't worry about it. I just need to do one more ritual and I'll be okay. When you have both going on at the same time, what makes it even, do you find that it's like doubly difficult to get through to someone who has both, or what are your thoughts?
I think it certainly can be more challenging. One thing that I've found too is that people who are in OCD treatment and who have a challenging relationship with alcohol that maybe doesn't meet the level of just being so problematic that it's clear that stopping is the answer, or that addressing it is the answer, that people can start to confuse, well, I'm thinking about alcohol over all the time and it's an intrusive thought, so that means it's an obsession. And I think, yes, of course, it's an obsession in the more colloquial terminology, but it's not an obsession in the way that we think of with regard to obsessive compulsive disorder. And so I don't know, I've certainly come across people who will not move forward with getting sober because they think, oh, well, it's almost like there's the thought is I'm either obsessed with alcohol or I'm obsessed with the idea that I might be an alcoholic, when the reality is the fact that it's coming up so much is a reflection of the obsession that we see in addiction, if that all makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think that fear of taking away what they think has kept them, is their saving grace.
Yeah.
And that's a scary thing to take that away when they think that's what keeps them going. But as we know, in the long run, that doesn't happen.
Since most of the people listening, obviously, to this webinar are people really from the OCD community, and maybe many of them haven't had substance use or family members what would be things to look out for family members to know if if a loved one might be dabbling into some substance use as a way to manage their OCD. Are there some tells or anything like that that you can share?
Lauren, you want to?
I think it's tough because just like with OCD, substance use disorder is such a secretive disorder, right?
Yeah.
And there's so much shame associated with it as well, that in addition to being secretive because you don't want to get caught, like which sometimes happens within the realm of alcohol use, and that you want to be able to maintain those things, that the use, I mean, that in addition, that it's just this sense that if people knew that I did this, nobody would understand. And I know I should stop, right? Like, I think that that's true of both OCD and substance use disorders, the awareness of, yeah, this is a problem. This is causing me an issue, and yet I can't stop doing it. That there's just a tremendous amount of shame around that. So I think it can be really hard to identify when somebody is using, unless they kind of want you to know.
Yeah. I mean, I think as a parent, I look back and I didn't know a lot of, I didn't know. I mean, Riley felt shame about it, and you know, and he was this good kid, and he played football, and he, you know, was salutatorian and all that kind of stuff, and he didn't, and he thought his worth was in high school because he was bright, and you know, and that it was that shame of because it was so wrong, and then you have young people who, I mean, what young person hasn't, you know, 95% of them have tried alcohol, and that's I mean, you know, and I think back to my high school, who didn't try it and who didn't, and I think that's the key, is where someone who also has that propensity to be an alcoholic, or be a, you know, that their brain is different. I think when you do scans, their brain is different, and that somebody can go through college and, you know, drink and have, and then, okay, I'm done. Whereas somebody that's struggles with addiction, that's not, they don't just go, oh, okay. It's a hard, difficult thing to stop.
Yeah.
And you need help, and so.
Well, what's interesting about what you're saying, Margaret, too, is that I think the very existence of a anxious, perfectionistic type A individual is in and of itself an indicator that we should, right, exactly, that oftentimes, and this is not universal, of course, because people with substance use come in all different packages, but oftentimes the substance use is it's an escape hatch for people who are so hyper focused and driven and wanting to be that good kid, that good person.
Right.
It's, I just need it somewhere that's an out. I know that was certainly the case for me. And what's really interesting on this topic, my parents didn't know that I was an alcoholic until I did my 9th step with them, when I went to make amends to them. And I said, I'm sorry for the way that I treated you. I was drinking. And they were like, what? You were? And so it is, I think it is really difficult to identify when.
Yeah. And it's hard. And I tell families, don't, because a lot of people go, why didn't I see that? Well, sometimes it's really hard to see. And so, is the communication but I think it starts much earlier than, what we'd like. We think, high school, they start high school. You know what? It's way before that now.
Yeah. If someone asks about, is it possible to recover from OCD? And Lauren, when you introduced yourself, you talked about being in recovery from alcohol. But still, there's that notion of, I don't drink anymore, but I'm an alcoholic, right? Just that holding on to that. And I think that it'd be something really great for people who have OCD or other things to learn of. I'm in recovery from OCD, but I still have it, right? That you probably have never said to anyone, well, I don't have OCD anymore, correct?
No, never.
No.
And I think to your point, like normalizing the fact that it's an ongoing dance with it, and that you learn you sort of become more proficient at the dance as time goes on, as opposed to obviously the thoughts and the feelings never go away.
So there's people that, and I've been doing this webinar now for about almost a year, and there are people consistently who will say, but I don't know that I can live with having OCD the rest of my life. So if I could ask you a more personal question, how do you live having OCD?
Well, I don't have a choice, I guess, is the thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think there's a point in the recovery process where you have to accept that that's the only choice. That you can wish. It kind of reminds me, actually, Dr. Jonathan Grayson writes a wonderful article about obsessing about obsessing, and this fear that comes up for a lot of people with OCD, that like, oh, I'm going to obsess about this, that, or the other thing, and that my obsessions are going to continue in perpetuity, kind of like what we're talking about, this long-term relationship with OCD. And he talks about the fact that we rob ourselves of the present moment by engaging in this wishing ritual, where we're constantly, well, it would be, it's active comparison. And that, if you are, for instance, one of the examples he gives I like is that if you're on a beach, on a lake at sunset, and you're watching the beautiful sunset, and you think, wow, this would be so much better if I was on a beach in the Caribbean sipping, a pina colada or whatever, that you miss the sunset. And so the way I figure it is that I get this life, and I certainly know, because of my experience, that it can be managed, right? And I've seen it in so many people that you can learn to develop a sense of humor with regard to your obsessions. Not that that's always the case, that you can laugh at it, but that you can have more playfulness, that you can use your experience in recovery to inform having a more compassionate life as well, and a more present life that's beyond the scope of OCD. But I think in terms of making the choice and how can I live with it forever, it's that I'm living with it, right? Like I'm doing my life, and I'm bringing it along with me for the ride, instead of the other way around. And I'm not willing to miss the sunset. I'm not willing to miss all of the beautiful moments that exist in a life that also includes obsessive thoughts and a whole lot of anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Wow, very well said, Lauren. If people would, that's super important. And whether it be OCD or addiction or any other mental health or grief or PTSD, anything that you deal with, that's, if you look at it that way, because life is hard for a lot of people, and Patrick, what you live with, going one day at a time, and I mean, it's that mindfulness of understanding the moment. And I get caught up with the grief that I think, oh God, I can't, and why me, and this isn't fair, but you know what, that doesn't do me any good, and anger doesn't do me any good. So how do you look at life and with a perspective like that, Lauren, that because I think that can help a lot of people.
Yeah. As a reminder to everyone, welcome to Diversity Matters Wednesday for part of the No CD Wednesday night webinar series. No CD downloadable on iOS or Google Play. Teletherapy through No CD available in all 50 states right now, and continuing to get more and more insurance coverage for that as well too, to be sure that people get affordable evidence-based treatment for obsessive compulsive disorder. So Margaret, to your side then, you're not the first parent who has lost somebody who has OCD and substance use, and even both. But you did something different than most parents have. And what was your motivation to do what you've done with the loss of Riley?
Well, Patrick, and try not to. I still,
Everyone get the Kleenex out. Here it comes.
Yeah,
just so you know. Yeah.
I try not to. You know what? That morning, I sat on my front porch and I kind of had a choice. I could not ever get out of bed, or I move forward. And how did that look? And I made that choice. Is that choice always easy? No, it's not. Sometimes I go, screw this. I don't, even advocacy work, sometimes it's just hard. But at the end of the day, I know that's what helped heal me and how I move forward. And I tell parents, don't look back. Look forward. What can you do going forward? And starting Riley's Wish Foundation and all the people that have come into my life because of this. I always thought I would be Riley's cheerleader and he would be the advocate, and it didn't turn out that way. So I decided, well, I guess it's going to be me. And but I've been grateful and so fortunate to meet so many wonderful people in this community that keeps me going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Patrick, one of them.
I agree. The people in this community are amazing. And I love to get to meet more and more and to do these webinars and to interact with the people on our chats, and everything has always been a bright spot of my week to see that people want to figure out how to live with the struggle, right? And if I can help guide some people through that experience along the way, then what a wonderful thing that I get to do, to have the voice. Hence the big microphone. That's why I want a really loud booming voice. OCD, not the big microphone. But it really is a great experience to be able to be here and to have the two of you on, and to be able to have these types of conversations with people as well too, especially over the fact that there's such a stigma about mental health. There's a stigma about substance use. COVID doesn't help anything with increasing concerns of isolation and substance use. And I remember there were people at the beginning who were screaming about, well, you closed down everything, but why not close down all the liquor stores at first? And how, imagine all of the withdrawal and the extra hospitalizations and everything that would have happened. Yep. Mm-hmm. But it shows us too that in crises, even like we're in right now, we've got to do a better job at helping people with mental health issues, substance use issues too. And so that's what I love about No CD, is being able to now have a reach across the country for people like that, and to get people that help, and to have the platform where I can bring individuals who have other specialties or lived experiences that are so amazingly pertinent to what's going on in the world today. I didn't know Riley, which is weird because I'd been to so many OCD conferences, but mm-hmm. I think that we were probably just in different age ranges enough that we didn't get to hang out with each other. But I know you well enough, Margaret, that I kind of feel like I know Riley a little bit from just how we've talked about him and everything.
He
I
would have
think
loved you. He would have loved your humor.
I think it's important too. Like one of the influences was even last year when we did the OCD conference. Stacy Conroy and I, who together co-chair the OCD Special Interest Group for the International OCD Foundation, really rallied for having a meeting at the conference. And it was the first time that it was ever done that there was now a meeting for people who had substance use issues that happened at the conference. They didn't have to leave the hotel to go find a place to go have that meeting, but that it was there. So even some of those little influences that I think are then just so important for people to have access to the help that they need. Mm-hmm. And if we can continue to push people to think in terms outside the box a little bit. It's not that hard to host a meeting for substance use at a conference, right? It's just right. It's just not that. You just call it Friends of Bill W. You put it on the conference placard, and the people who need to go there know that that's where they're going to go, right? So there are ways to make that happen, but it's good that with Foglia and with people like yourselves who are willing to talk about these experiences, that we're taking something that has been more secret and in the shadow and bringing it out into the open, because no one should die from shame or stigma. That's just not why we don't want to lose anybody to suicide for anything or accidental overdose for any reason whatsoever. But shame and stigma should definitely not be one of the reasons why something like that would happen as well too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
very true.
And I'm going to have Stacy on at some point so that we can do some discussions too about some of the things. So anyone who's asked some of the more technical questions, I'm going to reserve some of those for when Stacy comes on, because she's really my stats expert on all the statistics of OCD and SUD and all those kinds of things. But I do want to go through, there was a couple of things that I wanted to kind of take a look at as well on here too. If we just, there's the idea that we hear, and I mentioned this a little bit, and Kevin says this is I'm going to pull this up for Kevin. Kevin says, one more ritual and I'll be okay is the story of my life. And I also think one more drink or one more hit is also the story of many people's life. And then I'll stop after that. And what is the thing that do you think, what is that motivator? I've seen things on here that say people hit rock bottom. Maybe something's finally going to be taken away from your life. Some people get arrested and go to jail for something. Some people get a DUI. Some people have to go to a residential treatment center because their OCD is there. But I know Riley went to residential, and Lauren, you've had your own lived experiences with both these things. What's the turnaround experience for people? What is it that gets people to, do you think, finally say, it's time to do something different?
Do you want to go ahead, Margaret?
You know what? I think that's so individual. You hear that, well, I had to hit rock bottom. And a lot of people say, everybody's rock bottom is different.
You got that right.
And so I think, I remember Riley, I can tell this, he got stopped. He was way over the limit and became kind of combative with the officer, and they took him in, and he was combative, and the police guy said, "Ma'am, what is it going to take? What is this how you're going to live your life?" Mm-hmm. And Riley, hear this random, but that clicked with him. And
really?
Yeah, right after that.
Wow.
Was that his rock bottom? I don't know. We went through, but he talked about that often. And when he, and back to I told you, when he was in AA, his fear was that he would say something to somebody that would offend him, and and so, which you're not supposed to do, but what the heck? When he did his AA story, he recorded it secretly because he said he was like a recorder. His brain was like a recorder and so he had to go back over and over and over to make sure, that ritual of that he didn't hurt somebody or say something. So he recorded which for me, because I have that now. But some of the things that he talked about when he was in recovery, and that was one of them, was about that officer that said, man, what is it going to take? Is this how you're going to live your life?
Yeah.
And for him, that, so I think everybody's different. And Lauren, you can certainly, and that's a hard thing with families. Like people go, well, you just need to kick them out and you need to, and I remember, God, just struggling with just don't help them and they got to figure this out. And now I don't think I'm not sure that's the right, that's a struggle as a parent. What do you do? Because in the addiction part, it can be pretty tough. And I never did that, but, I thought, gosh, did I do the wrong thing? But I think it's just so individual with the person.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheadedly. I wish there was a point, right, that we could just say like, that's it. And then
exactly. You hit it.
Let's bring people there, and get them there quicker.
There'd be some confetti and
exactly.
This is your rock bottom. Welcome.
Congratulations.
This is your 1,000th drink. You are done. I think it is so dependent on your threshold for pain and suffering. And it's also dependent on how compelling that desire to use is. And that's so variable from person to person. I know for me, I had a pretty low pain threshold. I have what people in AA call a pretty like high bottom drunk story. And I think what they talk about in AA is this idea that you can raise the bottom up to people, right? Like that you don't have to hit rock bottom, that you can make a choice to stop, right? Like, and that's, I think having drawing a line in the sand at some point is what it ultimately comes down to, I think, with either OCD or alcoholism or addiction, that bottom is wherever you decide bottom is ultimately, and that not saying that it's easy by any stretch of the imagination, but I was 19 and I was really, I'd hurt enough people and I'd ruptured enough relationships, and I was just sick of who I'd become, and it was really that simple, which is infuriating because, I wish that there was something that I could say that, oh, this is why I did it, that could somehow transmit to somebody else. But yeah.
I mean, that's a good, look at all the people that struggle. What is it that changes somebody's life like you, Lauren, that makes that decision, and others that continue to stay in I don't know. I wish we had that answer.
Me too.
Yeah. I remember someone I treated once talked about the idea of useless fear, right? And how he felt his life was being ruled by useless anxiety, and yet it was taking over and controlling everything. But it was fears of things that didn't matter in the long run and couldn't have harmed him or anything like that. And I always look at OCD that way of I was talking to someone today who was in real crisis, and they talked about the idea that they were afraid of even, what if I wanted to do something, right? Maybe that's bad. And I talked about the idea of a horror film where it's not real, it's on a screen. And yet when somebody jumps out with a knife and just like that, everyone in the theater goes, whoa, and they jump backwards, right? So here's the thing that is not real, and yet you're afraid of it. And there you're seeing it, you're hearing the sounds and everything. And I wonder if OCD is kind of like a horror film playing in your head, almost. It's running that worst case scenario to you, which causes you to have that kind of experience. And it's, when you're in the movie theater, you can look around and see other people are there, and okay, there's a screen. But when you're in your head and you look around, it's like, there shouldn't be anything else that click that off. So the only reason that I can rationally, quote unquote, come up with why I had that is maybe I wanted that to be true. Maybe that really is real or something like that. Because I consistently hear from people, why would I feel the way I feel if it wasn't real? And maybe that's one of the biggest tricks of OCD, is it makes you feel like it's real, and that's why you believe it to be true.
Yes, that's the most dastardly trick that OCD plays.
Yeah.
I wrote an article about that a long time ago with my then supervisor, Tom Corboy, about this idea of the denial obsession, right? Being the greatest obsession of all. Well, it's not really OCD though. I'm really just using that as an out, and I'm in denial. But I think your metaphor of the horror movie is so poignant, and I think it acknowledges too that it doesn't have to make sense, right? We can be sitting in the safety of our own home and see an image and have a feeling, and it doesn't have to be real in order for us to have those feelings. And likewise, that we can have these thoughts and they can bring with them this hugely impactful, anxious punch, and that doesn't mean they don't have to make sense, right? In order for the anxiety to be real and to be something that you have to learn to navigate.
Right. Wow. Well, I'm always amazed how fast these hours go by. And sometimes we get to chat things, and sometimes we just have such great conversation that we can just run on some of this. And that was tonight. And so I want to take a minute just to thank the two of you for your bravery in the work that both of you do, and your advocacy, because it's people who are willing to tell their stories of what they've gone through in their own life to be a role model for others. And it's people who have figured out a way through suffering and have figured out how to turn that around to be a force for good for others, even though there's still that pain that sits down there every day. And so you two are very inspiring to the community at large. And I appreciate you both very much for being here with us tonight and sharing. And I know that this will be probably a big hit on our NoCD YouTube channel, because that's where this is going to live now. And so anyone, I think in the future, if anyone's working with anyone who knows that there's a combination of OCD and substance use, pull this up, listen to this, be inspired by what you've heard tonight from these two wonderful folks. And I'll let you guys give some parting words to the audience before we go.
Well, and I'll say, Patrick, first of all, thank you for including me in this, and this means a lot that we have this, and that now we have this. Here we are doing this webinar, and this discussion used to never happen. So, wow. And I want to tell those people listening, there is hope, there is treatment. And Lauren, I know Lauren and I have had this discussion, that if you go to your therapist and they don't want to talk about substance use, and you're struggling, if you're honest and they don't want to help you, then you find somebody else, because there is help out there. And if there's a therapist listening, and you don't have to be an expert on substance use, you can identify it. And if you have that connection with your patient that they will be honest with you, then get them help in that too. So whoever's listening, I'll be the first one to tell you there is hope, and there is, what is happening now in the community is inspiring for me. So thank you, Patrick, and thank you, NOCD. What an incredible, Stephen Smith has done just an incredible. When I read about him and how he was this young man that played football like Riley in college and struggled, and then look what he's done. It's just an inspiration. So
thank you so much to both of you for allowing me to be a part of this discussion. It really means a lot to me, and I'm with you, Margaret. I think it's just such a win that we're having this conversation and bringing increasingly more light to this subject. And I think to those who are out there and who are struggling, I know from the vantage point for me of both like OCD and SUD that I was always just looking for like some space to take a breath. And I thought that the only way to get that was through compulsions. I thought that the only way to get that was through drinking or using drugs. And I guess my hope for you is that you hold out the hope that you can have that breath without any of those things, and that there's so much hope out there. There are so many wonderful treatment providers. I mean, the fact that NOCD is providing therapy to 50 states and taking insurance, and there are more and more people who know how to effectively treat OCD, that I hope you stick it out, and I hope that you keep looking toward those values in the life that you want, because it is possible to achieve that with the urge to perform compulsions and the urge to drink along for the ride.
Well, thank you both. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. We'll see you again next week when we go back to our Q&A sessions that we have, and we'll talk to you all soon. Have a good night, everybody.
thank you.